The Labour Party's Renters' Rights Bill had its second reading, which aims to bring some huge changes in the rental sector. Naturally, this has a lot of property investors concerned, worried, but creates a lot of uncertainty in the property sector at least. Now, especially when it comes to Section 21, this is the no-fault eviction, potentially going out the window. And it creates this illusion that property investment, especially in England, is more risky. Now, I've been in property for over 20 years, and I have a slightly different view, especially when it comes to the biggest mistakes that landlords are making right now, which isn't directly related to Labour's proposals. In fact, a lot of landlords can't keep up with the ever-evolving rental sector, leaving themselves exposed to risks that they don't fully realise. In this video, I'm going to reveal the #1 mistake landlords are making right now, but most importantly, how to avoid it, regardless of whatever the government does next. Stay tuned. To better explain this, I'm going to share with you 3 scenarios by 3 different landlords who served Section 21, each one of them playing out very differently. First up is the Rogue Landlord, Mr. Davis. So, the story of Emily, the tenant, who's been in the property for around about a year now, has been an excellent tenant, paying her rent on time and keeping the property immaculate. However, she did have ongoing issues throughout those 12 months, which firstly was the heating, keep on breaking down, but also a leak coming from the ceiling. Now, Mr. Davis continually ignored Emily. Understandably, after 12 months, Emily, frustrated, sought some legal advice and threatened Mr. Davis to make sure that he can fix those problems. Now, the landlord, instead of fixing it, actually decided at the first opportunity to serve Section 21, the no-fault eviction. Emily decided not to dispute the eviction and decided to move out. However, this highlights how landlords use this Section 21 to exploit the law and avoid their responsibilities. This is, of course, in the minority, but it does happen. This next one is the business decision. Meet John, a model tenant, been in the property for 5 years and kept the property in excellent condition. However, Mr. Thompson, the landlord, had decided to sell. This was a reflection of the recent regulations, but also tax changes. Mr. Thompson can no longer make rental property viable for himself. However, the buyer who purchased the property wanted a vacant possession, which meant that he was forced to serve Section 21 to John. Now, John was devastated, but understanding the situation and that it was a business decision, not personal, John decided to move out. And this example shows how Section 21 can be served out of necessity from the landlord, even though the tenant has been in good standing. If you're finding this video helpful, make sure you smash that like button. It really does motivate me in pushing more of these videos out there. This next story perfectly illustrates the ongoing struggles that landlords have to endure due to the ongoing court delays. And this is despite promises of reform. Take the case of Dr. Renee, who back in October 2022 was forced to serve Section 21 to her tenant. This was due to ongoing issues, but also unpaid rent and damage to the property. Now, despite serving Section 21, by January 2023, the tenant hadn't left, forcing her to apply to the courts for an eviction through the court system. You'd think that the process would be very simple and it'd just take a few months. Unfortunately for Dr. Renee, this is where the real nightmare began. So back in March 2023, she finally received a date for the hearing, which was in June. Now, the tenant didn't even show up and the court couldn't proceed because they needed documents that the tenant had. The court was adjourned. By September 2023, the court finally granted possession by giving the tenant 14 days to vacate. However, by this date, the tenant still didn't leave. However, the landlord had to wait for the sealed court order before she can apply for bailiffs, which didn't arrive until the end of October. Now, by February 2024, she was still waiting for the bailiffs. That is 13 months of lost rent and a damaged property she can't even repair. Now, sadly, this story of Dr. Renee isn't unique in any way. Many landlords are stuck with this broken system. And in fact, even with Section 8 evictions, and this is where tenants are not paying rent, can take months and perhaps even more. If you're a landlord watching this, make sure you download our health and compliance checklist. The link will be on the description with everything you need to know to stay safe. The #1 mistake that landlords make is choosing the wrong tenant. As you can see, the no-fault eviction isn't the quick solution for problematic tenants that a lot of landlords do think they are. Of course, by the removing of this, it is going to create a lot of strain on the court system that already exists. However, the real mistake is in choosing the wrong tenant. This mistake exists now and will continue to exist regardless of the new laws. In fact, tenant application fraud is on the rise, with payslip fraud accounting for 58% of fraud in 2023 and overall tenant fraud up by 140%. If a fraudulent application slipped through, it could cost a landlord up to £10,000, wiping out years of profit. So how do you avoid this? Well, the first step is investing in the right area. So the best locations are always going to attract the best possible amount of tenants. And let me let you into a little secret. Most landlords that I've spoken to that do invest in the right areas have never had to serve a Section 21. So there is truth in the old saying, real estate is about location, location, location. After years in property, I've developed some intuition in spotting red flags. Of course, you should do your due diligence and your regular referencing, such as landlords, but also financial. But when you look at that financial, be sure to cross-reference the payslips with the bank statements and also contact the employer directly, especially when we see that fraud or the biggest amount of fraud does come through that payslips. When it comes to rent in advance, this is always going to give you some level of security for the period of time that they're paying for. So whether that be 6 months or a year. That is very typical when it comes to students, also with professionals over the course of the last 2-3 years. Just because it's so competitive, they are using rent in advance, such as 6 months or even a year, to remain competitive. However, if you do have an applicant who's just offering 6 months in advance, even though they will pass referencing, that to me gives me a red flag, and that is something that you want to look into. And if you do have some red flags but can't quite put your finger on it and don't want to walk away, then add the other layer of protection, which would be a UK guarantor with all the referencing that comes with it. In today's rental market, as we've seen, the risk involved isn't limited to your property being damaged. In fact, we can see it is those rent arrears or non-rental payments, but also those lengthy legal costs. So the next up is going to be insurance. There are a lot of insurance that will cover you for rent whilst you're going through that process, but also those legal costs. It's very important that you have a thorough search of those policies that are out there. And last and certainly not least, an article by Landlord Today suggests that a property expert advises for landlords to use a property expert to make sure to minimize the risk of getting a bad tenant. In fact, they advise to use a reputable letting agent to avoid falling victim to tenant fraud. In London, scammers are becoming more sophisticated, using AI to forge IDs, alter documents, and hide CCJs and IVAs. Fraudulent activities like cocooning, turning properties into legal cannabis farms, are a serious risk. So while saving on agent fees may sound tempting for a lot of landlords, in most cases it works out to be much more expensive down the road. And if you are looking for a great agent anywhere in the UK, I'm going to leave a link in the description. I'll be able to guide you in the right direction. In the meantime, if you want to find out the 10 illegal mistakes that landlords make sure you watch my next video.